Number the broadcast. The stars had always seemed friendly to humanity. For 300 years, they had traveled among them, building colonies, making friends, and trading with alien species who looked at them with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Humans were the new kids in the galaxy. They were friendly. They were adaptable. They worked hard and complained little. The elder races of the concord of aligned species found them useful, if somewhat primitive. The year was 2347, and humanity had spread to 17 colony worlds. They were not a powerful species by galactic standards. They had no great fleets, no ancient weapons, no mysterious technologies. What they had was determination and a talent for making themselves useful to others. New Helsinki was one of their proudest colonies. It sat on a green world in the outer reaches of human space, close to the border of the Vethrani dominion. The Vethrani were a reptilian species with scales the color of dried blood and eyes like yellow glass. They had ruled their sector for 10,000 years and did not appreciate humans settling so close to their territory. For years, the Vethrani had demanded that humans abandon New Helsinki. For years, Earth had politely refused. The colony was legal under Concord law. The humans had done nothing wrong. They simply wanted to live and work and raise their families under an alien sun. The Vethrani saw this as an insult. On a cold morning in March, a Vethrani fleet appeared in orbit above New Helsinki. There were 60 warships, more than enough to overwhelm the small defense force protecting the colony. The battle lasted less than an hour. Human ships burned in the atmosphere, falling like meteors across the sky. Then the Vethrani landed. They did not come to negotiate. They did not come to deport the colonists or force them onto refugee ships. They came with soldiers and recording equipment. They came with a plan that would echo across the galaxy forever. The Vethrani High Command had decided to teach humanity a lesson. They wanted every species in the Concord to see what happened to those who did not know their place. They wanted to remind the galaxy that some races were meant to rule and others were meant to serve. They gathered the colonists in the capital city. All of them. Men, women, children, elderly. 9.8 million human beings, forced into the streets at gunpoint. The Vethrani set up broadcast towers that would send their signal to every corner of known space. And then they began. The first to die were the colony's leaders. The governor, the council members, the defense commanders. They were executed one by one in the central square while cameras captured every moment. The Vethrani commander, a tall creature named Vos Toreth, spoke to the cameras with pride in his voice. "Let this be a message to all who watch," he said. "Humanity has forgotten its place. They are a young species, barely out of their cradle, and they dare to claim worlds that belong to their betters. Today, we remind them of the natural order. Today, we show the galaxy what happens to those who reach beyond their station." The killing continued for 14 hours. The Vethrani were methodical. They moved through the gathered colonists in groups, using weapons that ensured the deaths were visible and unmistakable. They wanted the galaxy to see. They wanted humanity to see. And humanity did see. On Earth, people gathered around screens in their homes, in public squares, in offices and schools. They watched in silence as their brothers and sisters died on a world light years away. Parents covered their children's eyes, but the sound still came through. The screams, the pleading, the cold announcements of the Vethrani as they counted the dead. On the other colony worlds, work stopped. Ships hung motionless in space as their crews watched the broadcast. Miners emerged from underground tunnels. Farmers left their fields. Scientists abandoned their experiments. Everyone watched. The Concord watched too. Representatives of 100 species saw the broadcast and shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some felt disgust. Some felt pity. But none moved to intervene. The Vethrani were a powerful member of the Concord, and humanity was, well, humanity was just humanity. A minor species. A useful one, perhaps, but not worth starting a war over. By the time the sun set on New Helsinki, 9.8 million human beings were dead. The Vethrani commander made one final statement to the cameras. "Let this be remembered," Vos Toreth said. "Humanity has been punished for its arrogance. We expect no further expansion into Vethrani space. We expect gratitude for our mercy in leaving their other colonies intact. The matter is closed." The broadcast ended. For a long moment, nothing happened. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how humanity would respond. The Concorde expected diplomatic protests, perhaps economic sanctions, maybe even an appeal to the galactic courts for justice. What they got was silence. The human ambassador to the Concorde, a woman named Sarah Chen, stood up from her seat in the great assembly hall. Every eye turned to her, waiting for the angry speech, the demand for action, the tears of grief. Ambassador Chen said nothing. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. She looked around the chamber at the representatives of 100 species, her gaze lingering on the Vethrani delegation. Then she simply walked out. Within hours, every human diplomat in the galaxy followed her example. They left their posts without explanation, without farewell. Human trade ships broke their contracts and turned toward home. Human workers on alien stations packed their belongings and departed on the next available transport. Earth closed its borders. The Concorde sent messages demanding explanation. They received no response. They sent ships to investigate. The ships were turned away at the edge of human space, politely but firmly. "We are in mourning," was the only message Earth would send. "Please respect our grief." The Vethrani laughed at this. They had expected weakness from the humans, and here it was. The soft species was crying, licking its wounds, accepting its punishment like a beaten animal. Vos Toreth gave interviews to galactic media, boasting of how easily humans had been put in their place. "They are not warriors," he said. "They are workers, servants. They build things and fix things and smile at their betters. That is their nature. We have simply reminded them of this truth." The other species of the Conquered were less certain. Some of them had worked with humans for centuries. They had seen something in human eyes that the Vethrani had missed. Behind the friendly smiles and the helpful attitudes, there was something else. Something old and patient and very, very dangerous. But these concerns were dismissed as paranoia. Humans were harmless. Everyone knew that. On Earth, the last of the broadcasts from New Helsinki were being archived. Every moment of those 14 hours was preserved, catalogued, and stored. The faces of the dead were identified and recorded. Their names were added to a list that would never be forgotten. In the great cities of Earth, there were no protests, no riots, no public displays of grief. The streets were quiet. The factories were quiet. Everything was quiet. But in that silence, something was happening. Something was changing. Deep in the heart of human civilization, a decision was being made. Not by governments or military leaders, but by the species itself. A collective understanding that passed from person to person without words. The humans had always chosen to be kind. They had always chosen to be peaceful. They had built their society on cooperation and trade and friendship. But they had not always been this way. Before they reached the stars, humans had spent 100,000 years learning how to kill. They had fought ice ages and predators and each other. They had invented war before they invented writing. Violence was not foreign to them. They had simply chosen to leave it behind. Now, watching the recordings of New Helsinki play on endless loop, humanity remembered what it had chosen to forget, and in the silence of their grief, they began to prepare. The silence. 6 months passed after the massacre at New Helsinki. The galaxy moved on. Trade continued. Politics continued. Life continued. The Vethrani celebrated their victory and expanded their patrols along the border of human space. They expected the humans to come crawling back eventually, begging for forgiveness, asking to resume their place as useful workers in the galactic economy. The humans did not come. Behind their closed borders, something unprecedented was happening. Every factory on Earth had stopped making consumer goods. Every shipyard had stopped building cargo vessels. Every research facility had abandoned its previous projects. The entire economic output of 17 colony worlds had been redirected toward a single purpose. Admiral James Okonkwo stood on a platform overlooking the largest shipyard in human space. Below him, thousands of workers moved like ants across the skeleton of a warship. Not a graceful vessel designed for exploration or trade, but something brutal and angular, built for one purpose and one purpose only. "How many?" asked the woman standing beside him. President Elena Vasquez had aged 10 years and 6 months. Her hair had gone gray, and there were lines on her face that had not been there before, but her eyes were clear and hard. 12,000 combat-ready vessels by the end of the month, Okonkwo replied. Another 8,000 in various stages of completion. We can have 20,000 operational within a year. The Vethrani have 400 warships. Yes, ma'am. President Vasquez nodded slowly. And the new weapons? The plasma lance batteries exceed all projections. The kinetic accelerators can punch through Vethrani armor at twice the expected range. And the interdiction technology. Okonkwo paused, a grim smile crossing his face. The Vethrani don't know about the interdiction technology. Nobody does. We've been developing it in secret for 2 centuries, waiting for a day we hoped would never come. A day like this. Yes, ma'am. A day like this, across human space. Similar conversations were taking place. In underground bunkers, scientists worked on weapons that had been theoretical just months ago. In training facilities, soldiers drilled with a focus and intensity that their instructors had never seen before. In factories that had once made household appliances, machines now produced ammunition and armor and the components of war. The transformation was total. Every human, from the oldest grandmother to the youngest child, understood what was happening. They did not need to be told. They had all watched the same broadcast. They had all seen the same faces. They had all heard the same screams. On a space station orbiting Mars, a young engineer named David Park worked 20-hour shifts designing targeting systems for the new warships. He had lost his sister on New Helsinki. She had been a teacher there, helping colony children learn about Earth's history. Now her face was in the archive, one of 9.8 million. David did not cry. He did not rage. He simply worked. When his colleagues asked him how he could remain so calm, he looked at them with eyes that held something they could not name. I watched my sister die, he said quietly. I watched them kill her while she was holding one of her students. A little girl, maybe 7 years old. They killed them both with the same shot. His colleagues said nothing. The Vethrani think we're weak, David continued. They think we'll forget. They think time will heal this wound and we'll go back to being the friendly, helpful humans they've always known. He turned back to his work, his hands steady on the controls. They're wrong. The Concord grew increasingly nervous as the months passed. They sent diplomats to the edge of human space, requesting meetings, demanding explanations. The humans received them politely but told them nothing. We are still in mourning, Ambassador Chen said in one of her rare communications. We ask for patience and understanding during this difficult time. But what are you doing in there? The Concord representative demanded. Our sensors show massive industrial activity. Your shipyards are working at unprecedented capacity. What are you building? Ambassador Chen smiled. It was not a warm smile. We are processing our grief in our own way. Please do not concern yourselves. The Vethrani representative in the Concord Assembly laughed when he heard this report. They are building toys, he said dismissively. Perhaps they hope to impress us with their little ships. Perhaps they think we will be frightened by their pathetic displays of strength. Let them build. Let them waste their resources. When they finally emerge from their hiding, they will find us waiting, and they will learn their lesson all over again. Some of the older species exchanged glances. They had dealt with humans longer than the Vethrani. They remembered stories from the early days of contact, when humanity first emerged from its solar system. There had been incidents then, small conflicts with pirates and hostile species. The humans had won those conflicts. But what struck the elder races was not their victory. It was how they won. When humans fought, they did not stop. They did not negotiate. They did not accept partial victories. They continued until the threat was completely eliminated. It was disturbing, some of the elder races thought, as if the friendly exterior was just a mask over something much darker. But these concerns were ignored. The Vethrani were confident. The Concord was complacent, and the humans remained silent. In the 6th month, the Concord finally managed to get a spy drone past human border defenses. It transmitted images for approximately 30 seconds before it was destroyed. Those 30 seconds changed everything. The images showed a fleet. Not hundreds of ships, but thousands, tens of thousands. Warships in formations that stretched beyond the drone's visual range. Each vessel was bristling with weapons that Concord analysts could not identify. The scale of the construction was impossible. No species could build so many ships so quickly. But humans were not like other species. When the Concord Council convened to discuss the images, there was panic in the chamber. The Vethrani representative demanded to know how this was possible. The answer came from an elderly scientist from one of the oldest species in the galaxy. We forgot what humans are, he said quietly. We saw their kindness and their cooperation, and we thought that was their nature. But kindness is a choice they make. Cooperation is a strategy they employ. What we are seeing now is what they truly are when that choice is taken from them. And what is that? Someone asked. The old scientist looked at the images of the human fleet. Endless rows of warships ready for war. Humans evolved on a death world, he said. They fought everything. Weather, predators, diseases, and most of all, each other. They industrialized warfare centuries before they industrialized anything else. They are the most efficient killers the galaxy has ever produced. They simply decided, long ago, to stop, to be better, to choose peace. He turned to face the Vethrani representative, who had gone very pale. You killed 9.8 million of them while the galaxy watched. The old scientist continued. You didn't just murder their people. You humiliated them. You stripped away their choice to be peaceful. And now you will see what happens when humans have nothing left to lose. The Vethrani demanded protection from the Concord. They demanded that the other species unite against the human threat. But when the vote was taken, only a handful of races sided with them. The rest remembered New Helsinki. They remembered the 14 hours of broadcast murder. They remembered the faces of the dying. Humanity had been kind to them for 3 centuries. The Vethrani had been cruel to everyone for 10,000 years. The galaxy made its choice. 1 week later, the human ambassador returned to the Concord Assembly. She stood before the gathered representatives of 100 species and delivered a message from Earth. We thank the Concord for its neutrality in the coming conflict, she said. We assure you that our actions will be directed solely against the Vethrani Dominion. We have no quarrel with any other species. We ask only that you do not interfere. What are you going to do? Someone called out. Ambassador Chen looked at the Vethrani delegation. They were trying to appear brave, but fear was visible in their yellow eyes. We are going to balance the scales, she said simply. Nothing more, nothing less. She left the chamber without another word. 3 days later, the human fleet began to move. Number the reckoning begins. The Vethrani home system had been the center of their civilization for 10,000 years. 12 inhabited worlds orbited their ancient sun, each one a monument to Vethrani power and pride. 31 billion citizens lived under the protection of orbital defense platforms, military stations, and a fleet of 400 warships that had never known defeat. They had 3 days warning that the human fleet was coming. 3 days to prepare their defenses, position their ships, and ready themselves for war. The Vethrani High Command was confident. Yes, the humans had more ships, but quantity was not everything. Vethrani warriors were trained from birth for combat. Vethrani technology had been refined over millennia. Vethrani honor would not allow defeat. They were wrong about everything. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 15,000 warships appeared simultaneously across the system, each one dropping out of hyperspace at precisely calculated coordinates. The Vethrani had expected the humans to arrive at the system's edge and advance slowly, giving the defenders time to organize. Instead, the humans appeared everywhere at once, surrounding the entire system in a sphere of steel and fire. Admiral Okonkwo sat in the command center of the flagship Earth's Memory. He studied the tactical display showing the positions of every Vethrani ship, every defense platform, every military installation. 6 months of intelligence gathering had given humanity perfect knowledge of their enemy's defenses. All ships report ready, his executive officer announced. Begin the interdiction, Okonkwo ordered. Across the system, human ships activated technology that the galaxy had never seen. Interdiction fields expanded outward, creating barriers that prevented faster-than-light travel. The Vethrani fleet found itself trapped. They could not run. They could not call for help. They could only fight, and they did fight. 400 Vethrani warships launched themselves at the human fleet, weapons blazing. They were brave. They were skilled. They died anyway. The first engagement lasted 47 minutes. By the end, not a single Vethrani warship remained intact. The plasma lances developed in human laboratories cut through Vethrani armor like paper. The kinetic accelerators punched holes through shields that had stopped every weapon the galaxy had thrown at them. The Vethrani commanders died, still trying to understand how they had been so completely outmatched. The orbital defense platforms lasted slightly longer. They were designed to withstand siege, to hold out for months against attacking fleets. The humans destroyed them in hours. Wave after wave of missiles overwhelmed their point defense systems. Heavy weapons batteries reduced them to expanding clouds of debris. By the end of the first day, the Vethrani had no military presence in their home system. Every ship, every station, every weapon had been destroyed or captured. The 12 worlds lay defenseless below, their populations watching the sky in terror. The Concord sent urgent messages demanding that humanity stop. The attack was over, they argued. The Vethrani were defeated. There was no need for further violence. Earth's response was simple. A single number broadcast across all frequencies. 9,800,000. When we reach that number, the message continued, we will discuss terms. The galaxy realized, with growing horror, that the battle was just the beginning. Human troop transports began descending toward the Vethrani homeworld. Millions of soldiers, equipped with powered armor and supported by autonomous combat drones, landed on every continent. They did not use weapons of mass destruction. They did not bomb cities from orbit. They came down in person, on foot, to do what needed to be done. General Maria Santos commanded the ground forces. She was a small woman with gray hair and steady hands, a veteran of conflicts that had never been recorded in official histories. She had lost a son on New Helsinki. He had been a medic, helping the wounded when the Vethrani came. They had killed him anyway. Rules of engagement. She announced to her commanders, we are not here for genocide. We are here for justice. Every Vethrani death must be recorded and logged. We are counting to 9.8 million. Not one more, not one less. And civilians? Someone asked. Offer them the choice. Evacuation to designated safe zones. Or, she paused, or they can take their chances. The advance began. Human soldiers moved through Vethrani cities with terrible efficiency. They did not rage or destroy randomly. They moved methodically, block by block, building by building. Military targets were prioritized first. Soldiers, police, government officials who had supported the massacre. Then the count began. The Vethrani fought back. Of course they did. They were a proud warrior species. They set ambushes and traps. They launched counterattacks. They died in enormous numbers, but they made the humans pay for every meter of ground. But the humans kept coming. Private James Chen was 23 years old. He had never killed anyone before the war began. Now he moved through the ruins of a Vethrani city, his rifle steady in his hands, his eyes scanning for movement. He had watched the broadcast from New Helsinki, just like everyone else. He had seen faces he recognized among the dead. A Vethrani soldier appeared from behind a collapsed wall, weapon raised. James shot him 3 times in the chest before the alien could fire. He watched the body fall, then checked his helmet display. The counter ticked upward. 3,847,293. More than 3 million dead. Less than 6 million to go. You ever feel bad about this? His squadmate asked, as they continued forward. James thought about the question. He remembered watching the broadcast, seeing children executed while their parents screamed. He remembered the Vethrani commander's proud speech about putting humanity in its place. No, he said, I don't. They moved on. News of the invasion spread across the galaxy. Observers from the Concord watched in horrified fascination as human forces advanced across the Vethrani homeworld. They had never seen anything like this. Most wars were fought in space, between fleets. Ground invasions were rare and usually quick. But the humans were not interested in a quick victory. They were interested in a number. The count reached 5 million, then 6 million, then 7. The Vethrani government sent messages begging for mercy. They offered to surrender unconditionally. They offered to pay any reparations. They offered to exile every official who had ordered the massacre. The humans ignored them. We are not negotiating, General Santos replied to one desperate plea. We are balancing. When the scales are even, we will stop. Not before. Some Concord species argued that this was barbarism, that humanity was no better than the Vethrani, that 2 wrongs did not make a right. Others pointed out that the Vethrani had killed 9.8 million humans live, on broadcast, for the purpose of humiliation and terror. They had been proud of it. They had celebrated it. Now, they were experiencing the consequences. The count reached 8 million. On the Vethrani homeworld, cities burned. Refugee camps swelled with civilians who had chosen evacuation over death. Human soldiers distributed food and water to these refugees. treating them with strange courtesy. The Vethrani did not understand. How could these same humans who killed with such efficiency also show kindness to survivors? An elderly Vethrani woman asked a human medic this question while he treated her injured grandchild. The medic looked at her with tired eyes. "We don't hate you," he said quietly. "We don't hate anyone. We're just settling a debt. Once it's paid, we'll stop." "But we killed your people," the woman said. "Don't you want revenge?" The medic finished bandaging the child and stood up. "This isn't revenge," he said. "Revenge is emotional. Revenge is angry. This is just accounting. 1 for 1. When the numbers match, the account is closed." He moved on to the next patient. The count reached 9 million, then 9.5 million, then 9.7 million. The human advance slowed as they approached the target number. Every death was carefully verified. Every body was scanned and logged. There could be no mistakes, no undercounting, no overcounting. At 9,799,999, the advance stopped. General Santos stood in the ruins of what had been the Vethrani Capitol building. One more death would balance the scales. One more number would close the account. Target acquired. A sniper reported over the communication channel. Vos Torath, the commander who ordered the massacre. "I have a clear shot." General Santos closed her eyes. She thought of her son. She thought of all the faces in the archive. She thought of what humanity had been forced to become. "Take the shot," she said. A single crack echoed across the ruined city. The counter ticked to 9,800,000. "All forces," General Santos announced. "Halt advance. The account is settled." Across the Vethrani homeworld, human soldiers stopped moving. Weapons lowered. The killing was over. Exactly 9.8 million Vethrani were dead. Not one more. Not one less. The galaxy watched in stunned silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Number the galaxy watches. The counter had stopped at 9,800,000. Human forces stood motionless across the Vethrani homeworld. Weapons lowered. Waiting. The remaining Vethrani waited too, certain that this was just a pause before the final extinction of their species. But the humans did not move. In the Great Hall of the Concord, representatives of 100 species watched the live feeds from Vethrani space. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. They had just witnessed something that had never happened in galactic history. A species deliberately counting its kills, stopping at an exact number, and then simply waiting. "What are they doing?" the Threll ambassador whispered. "I don't know," replied her colleague. "I don't think anyone knows." On the Vethrani homeworld, the silence stretched for hours. Human soldiers maintained their positions but made no aggressive moves. Medics continued treating wounded refugees in the camps. Engineers began assessing damage to infrastructure. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the killing machine had transformed into something else entirely. General Santos walked through the ruins of the capital city. Around her, Vethrani survivors emerged from hiding places, staring at the human soldiers with confusion and fear. They had expected death. They had prepared for death. This strange calm was more terrifying than any weapon. A Vethrani officer approached her, his scales pale with stress. "Why have you stopped?" he demanded. "Why don't you finish it?" Santos looked at him with tired eyes. "We came to balance the scales. The scales are balanced. But you could destroy us completely. You have the power. Your fleet dominates our system. Your soldiers control our world. Why would you stop?" "Because we said we would." The officer stared at her, unable to comprehend. In Vethrani culture, power was meant to be used. A stronger enemy destroyed weaker enemies completely. Mercy was weakness. Restraint was foolishness. "You are lying," he said. "You must be planning something. A trap. A trick." General Santos shook her head slowly. "No trap. No trick. We killed 9.8 million of your people because you killed 9.8 million of ours. The debt is paid. What happens next is your choice." She walked away, leaving the officer standing alone in the rubble. Across the galaxy, the Concord held emergency sessions to discuss what they had witnessed. The debate was fierce and confused. "This is still genocide," one representative argued. "They killed nearly 10 million Vethrani. How is this acceptable?" "The Vethrani killed 10 million humans first," another countered. "They broadcast it live. They celebrated it. Are we really going to condemn humanity for responding in kind? But the precision of it disturbs me, a third voice added. The way they counted. The way they stopped exactly at the number. It's as if killing has become arithmetic to them. An elderly scientist from the more death species rose to speak. He had studied humanity since first contact, 3 centuries ago. The other representatives fell silent, curious to hear his perspective. I have spent my life trying to understand humans, he began. When they first came to the stars, we thought they were simple creatures, friendly, cooperative, eager to please. We welcomed them as junior partners in galactic civilization. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We were wrong. Not about their friendliness or cooperation. Those things are real. But we mistook the nature of those qualities. We thought they were expressions of weakness, of a species that had never known hardship. The truth is exactly opposite. He activated a display showing human history. Wars, famines, plagues, disasters. Millions of years of violence and struggle compressed into a few minutes. Humans evolved on one of the most hostile worlds we have ever documented. They survived ice ages that killed 90% of their population. They fought predators that should have driven them extinct, and most of all, they fought each other. For resources, for territory, for ideology, for reasons we still don't fully understand. The images shifted to show human wars, ancient battles with swords and spears, industrial conflicts with tanks and aircraft, nuclear weapons blooming like deadly flowers. Before they reached space, humans had killed more of their own kind than the total population of most concord species. They industrialized warfare centuries before they industrialized anything else. They are, without question, the most efficient killers the galaxy has ever produced. He turned off the display, and then they stopped. They made a conscious decision, as a species, to put their violent nature aside. They chose to be kind. They chose to be helpful. They chose to be the friendly traders and workers we have known for 3 centuries. He looked at the Vethrani delegation, who had been allowed to remain as observers, but it was always a choice. And when you took 9.8 million of their people and killed them on live broadcast, you took away their ability to make that choice. You reminded them of what they spent millennia trying to forget. You woke something that should have been allowed to sleep. The chamber was silent. What disturbs me, the scientist continued, is not the violence of human response. Violence I understand. What disturbs me is the control. They built a fleet of 20,000 warships in 6 months. They conquered a system that has stood for 10,000 years in a single day. They killed exactly 9.8 million Vethrani. Not one more, not one less. And then they stopped. He shook his head slowly. Do you understand what that means? It means they could have done so much more. They could have exterminated the Vethrani completely. They could have bombed their worlds to ash. They had the power, and, many would argue, the justification, but they chose not to. So we should be grateful? The Vethrani representative spat. You should be terrified, the scientist replied calmly. Not because humans are violent, but because they are violent and controlled. They can turn their killing instinct on and off like a light switch. They can count their enemies' deaths and stop at a predetermined number. They can transform from peaceful traders to efficient killers and back again without losing themselves. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. That is not normal. That is not how sentient beings are supposed to work. Every other species in this galaxy, when pushed to violence, loses some measure of control. We rage, we fear, we hate. Humans feel all those things too, but they don't let those feelings rule them. Even in the midst of what they called balancing the scales, they remained rational, organized, efficient. He sat back. The Vethrani believed they were teaching humanity a lesson. They were wrong. Humanity just taught the galaxy a lesson, and I hope we are wise enough to learn it. The debate continued for hours, but the scientists' words hung over everything. Some species demanded sanctions against humanity. Others argued that the Vethrani had brought this upon themselves. A few quietly began recalculating their diplomatic relationships, suddenly very aware of how they had treated their human neighbors over the centuries. Meanwhile, on the Vethrani homeworld, something unexpected was happening. Human engineering teams had begun clearing rubble from the capital city. Medical units were expanding their operations to treat not just refugees but anyone who needed help. Supply ships were descending from orbit, carrying food and building materials. The Vethrani did not understand. A young Vethrani woman approached a human engineer who was working to restore power to a destroyed hospital. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "You just killed millions of us." The engineer wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at her. "The killing is done. Now we rebuild." "But why?" He considered the question. "Because that's who we are when we're not fighting. We build things. We fix things. We help people." He returned to his work. "The war is over. What comes next is up to you." The woman stood watching him for a long time, trying to understand. Her father had been a soldier who died fighting the human advance. Her mother had fled to a refugee camp with her younger siblings. Everything she had known was destroyed. And yet here was a human, an enemy, working to rebuild her hospital. Across the galaxy, observers recorded these strange scenes. Humanity was not acting like a conquering army. They were acting like disaster relief workers, cleaning up after a storm they themselves had caused. Some called it hypocrisy, others called it manipulation. A few, the more thoughtful ones, recognized it as something else entirely. Humanity was showing the galaxy exactly what they were, a species capable of both terrible violence and genuine compassion, who chose which face to show based on how they were treated. The message was clear, even if it was never spoken aloud. This is what we can be when you push us. This is what we prefer to be when you don't. The choice is yours. The conquered received this message. They would not forget it. Neither would the Vethrani. Number the mercy they didn't deserve. 3 weeks after the counter stopped, humanity finally agreed to formal negotiations. The remaining Vethrani leadership gathered in what was left of their great council hall, surrounded by the ruins of their once proud civilization. Across from them sat human representatives led by Admiral Okonkwo and President Vasquez, who had traveled from Earth to deliver humanity's terms in person. The Vethrani expected harsh demands: territory, resources, permanent occupation, perhaps even the complete dissolution of their government. They had prepared themselves to accept whatever humiliation was required. What they received was something they never anticipated. President Vasquez stood before the assembly, her face calm and unreadable. Behind her, screens showed images from both New Helsinki and the Vethrani homeworld. The cost of what had happened, displayed for all to see. 6 months ago, Commander Vos Torath stood before cameras and declared that humanity needed to be taught its place. She began. He killed 9.8 million of our people to deliver that lesson. Men, women, children. Broadcast, live for the entire galaxy to watch. The Vethrani officials shifted uncomfortably. "We have answered. 1 life for 1 life. No more, no less. The account is balanced." She paused. "And now we must decide what comes next." An elderly Vethrani counselor found his voice. "We expect you will demand our subjugation, our resources, our worlds. You have the power to take whatever you want." "Yes," Vasquez agreed. "We do." She let the words hang in the air. "But we will not." Confusion rippled through the Vethrani delegation. The counselor leaned forward. "I don't understand. Humanity did not come to the stars to build an empire," Vasquez explained. "We came because we wanted to be part of something larger than ourselves, to meet new species, to learn, to grow, to share what we have. That has always been our nature." She gestured at the screens, showing the destruction. "What you see behind me is what happens when that nature is violated, when our people are murdered for the crime of existing, when our children are killed to make a political point. We are capable of terrible things when we are pushed to them. This war has proven that beyond any doubt." Her voice hardened. "But terrible things are not what we want. They are not what we choose. They are what we become when all other choices are taken from us." She looked directly at the Vethrani leaders. "You killed our people to teach us a lesson. We killed your people to answer. The lesson and the answer are complete. The question now is whether we will be forever defined by this horror, or whether we can build something else from its ashes." Admiral Okonkwo stepped forward with a data tablet. "These are our terms. Read them." The Vethrani counselor took the tablet with trembling hands. As he read, his confusion deepened. The terms were unlike anything in galactic history. Humanity demanded no territory, no resources, no reparations. Instead, they proposed something unprecedented: a partnership. Human engineers would help rebuild Vethrani infrastructure. Human doctors would help treat the wounded. Human teachers would help educate the next generation not in human ways, but in Vethrani traditions that had been disrupted by the war. In exchange, the Vethrani would contribute their knowledge and skills to joint projects that would benefit both species. "This is a trick," another counselor hissed. "They want to infiltrate our society, control us from within." "No," President Vasquez replied. "We want to heal. Both our peoples have been wounded by what happened. Hatred and resentment will only make those wounds fester. We are offering another path." "Why?" The question came from a young Vethrani officer, her voice breaking. "Why would you help us after what we did?" Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. "Because I have a daughter," she finally said. "She's 14 years old. I want her to grow up in a galaxy where this never happens again. Not to humans. Not to Vethrani. Not to anyone." She walked to the window and looked out at the ruined city. "I could spend the rest of my life hating your species for what happened at New Helsinki. I could teach my daughter to hate. I could ensure that our peoples remain enemies for generations, locked in cycles of revenge and counter-revenge until one of us is finally destroyed." She turned back to face them. "Or I can choose something different. Something harder but better. I can choose to believe that what happened was the act of specific individuals making terrible decisions, not the inevitable expression of Vethrani nature. I can choose to work toward a future where my daughter and your children can meet as friends instead of enemies." "You speak of choice," the elderly counselor said slowly. "But you demonstrated that you can destroy us whenever you wish. How can there be true partnership between species when one holds such power over the other?" Admiral Okonkwo answered. "There will always be power differences between species. The Vethrani held power over us before the war, and you chose to use it for murder and humiliation. We hold power now, and we are choosing differently." He leaned forward. "That's the point. Power itself is not good or evil. What matters is how it's used. For 3 centuries, humanity has tried to use whatever power we have to help rather than harm. The massacre at New Helsinki forced us to show another face, but that face is not who we want to be. It's not who we choose to be." The Vethrani leaders deliberated among themselves in low voices. Some argued that this was certainly a trap. Others pointed out that they had no choice but to accept whatever terms were offered. A few, the younger ones mostly, wondered if perhaps the humans meant what they said. Finally, the elderly counselor spoke again. "We accept your terms, but I must ask one more question." "Ask. Do you forgive us?" The room went silent. It was the question everyone had been afraid to voice. President Vasquez closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were glistening. "No," she said quietly. "I cannot forgive you. What you did at New Helsinki is beyond forgiveness. My government, my people, we will never forget those 14 hours. We will never stop mourning our dead." She took a deep breath. "But forgiveness is not required for peace. Understanding is not required for cooperation. We don't have to love each other, or even trust each other. We simply have to decide, together, that we will not let the worst moment of our shared history define our entire future." She extended her hand. "I offer you peace. Not forgiveness, not friendship. Just peace. A chance to build something other than more graves. The rest will have to come with time, if it comes at all." The elderly counselor looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. "Peace," he agreed. "For now, peace." In the weeks that followed, the galaxy watched in astonishment as human ships brought not weapons but supplies to Vethrani worlds. Engineers worked alongside former enemies to rebuild cities. Doctors treated patients regardless of species. Schools reopened with human and Vethrani teachers working together. It was not easy. There were incidents, fights, old hatreds flaring into new violence. Some humans could not forgive. Some Vethrani could not accept help from those who had killed their families. But slowly, painfully, something new began to grow. The Concord formally ended its neutrality and offered support for the reconstruction. Other species, watching humanity's choice, began to reconsider their own relationships with former enemies. If humans could offer peace after such horror, perhaps others could too. 300 years later, a Vethrani historian named Kes Torath, distant descendant of the commander who had ordered the massacre, completed her life's work, a comprehensive history of what came to be known as the Reckoning. Her conclusion was studied in academies across known space. "We made the error all species make with humans. We saw their kindness and thought it was weakness. We saw their patience and thought it was fear. We saw their cooperation and thought it was submission. We did not understand that humans choose these things. They are not incapable of violence. They have simply, after millennia of practicing it upon themselves, decided to be better. When my ancestor killed 9.8 million humans on New Helsinki, he believed he was demonstrating Vethrani superiority. Instead, he demonstrated Vethrani ignorance. He woke a sleeping giant and filled it with terrible purpose. But the true lesson of the reckoning is not human capacity for destruction. Any species can destroy. The true lesson is what happened after the destruction ended. The humans could have exterminated us. They chose mercy. They could have enslaved us. They chose partnership. They could have hated us forever. They chose to try for something better. That is the lesson. Humans are not kind because they must be. They are kind because they choose to be. They are not peaceful because they are weak. They are peaceful because they are strong enough to afford peace. My people have lived with this truth for 3 centuries now. We have become allies, partners, even friends with the species that once brought us to our knees. Our children play with their children. Our scientists work with their scientists. Our futures are intertwined in ways my ancestor could never have imagined. And still, every year, on the anniversary of New Helsinki, humans across the galaxy pause to remember. They speak the names of the dead. They light candles that burn for 14 hours, one for each hour of the massacre. They do not forget. They will never forget, but they have chosen not to let memory become hatred. That choice, that impossible, illogical, beautiful choice is what makes humanity unique in this galaxy. Not their capacity for violence, not their industrial might, not their stubborn determination, their capacity for grace. May we all learn to choose as wisely. The book became required reading across the Concord. And in schools on both human and Vethrani worlds, children learned about the reckoning not as a story of war and revenge, but as a lesson in the power of choice. The dead of New Helsinki were never forgotten. But because of choices made by those who survived them, their deaths became the foundation of something new, something better, something human.